Um, you may have just heard the AI lady say that we're recording this meeting, which we used to do in the old days. This is the fifth season for Conversations on the Partner's Path. And my name is Cathy Boyd. And when we started, it was during the pandemic, and everyone was discovering, that you didn't have to be in person. So Zoom has been one of the great miracles, one of the great legacies um, of the pandemic. And I would like to open with a little bit of prayer, and then I have some sort of introductory things, and then we'll get right into talking with Darren. Super excited to have Darren with us. So let's open with this is a pilgrim's prayer written by a person named Nineveh Murray. Dear God, we ask your blessing as we travel today in spirit. Guide our minds as we learn of those who came before us, traversing the pilgrim way. Give us a hunger to seek your face in paths through fields, along roads trod by many, seeking the blessing of your presence. Nurture our fellowship and help us to see each other as brother or sister, sharing the journey to your blessed kingdom. Amen. So, as I said, we are in our fifth year of doing this. I'm pretty sure I know that each of you is a clergy spouse. Pan, you're doubled. Yeah, there you are. You're doubled up. Um, I need to say, just for the record, that the first couple times we did it, we had people who were friends of clergy spouses, but not spouses there themselves. And one of the things that feels important to me is that a lot of times clergy will have conferences and meetings and diocesan whatevers, and somebody will bring in a speaker, but the spouse doesn't always have a chance to hear interesting stuff and have value added spirituality. And so that's what this is for. That's what this project is for. We are recording it. It's meant to be a safe place, but if the fact that we're recording doesn't feel um, right to you, feel free to turn off your camera, although it sure is great to see your faces. The reason we're doing this is that not everybody can make it at this time on the first Monday of the month. And we've had a lot of requests for people who want to watch the conversation later. And so we're going to see if we can make that available to people. We do use the chat. I hope that you'll make use of the chat. Lainey or Jane is going to watch if a question pops up, and the that conversation doesn't get recorded. So, FYI. So, as we get started, would you please type into the chat where you're joining us from? Where do you live? Little something about yourself if you like, because we've kind of gotten used to being able to multitask on this sort of thing, and I'd love to know where you're calling from. So, my new friend Darren Herring, I met at General Convention in Louisville when we were admiring. There was a booth in the exhibit hall from a parish in Kentucky that was advertising for a rector. Hey, come be our rector. And I was so stunned at the brilliance of that I stopped and I met Darren and his wife Holly at that time. And it turns out that we knew Holly from the Diocese of Lexington, so it's always a small world. But I would love for you, Darren, to tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about how you became a clergy spouse. One of the things that's endlessly fascinating to me is that some of us knew from the get-go. We knew that we were marrying a member of the clergy or a seminarian, and some of us married, a lawyer, and who later became. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into this business.
Yes. Well, excuse me. I'm originally from Southern Illinois, so a very, very, very small town. And I've pretty much lived all over Europe and the US, and found myself in Phoenix, Arizona, at All Saints Episcopal, uh, which is one of the cardinal parishes of our diocese, on their music staff. And Holly, my spouse, not my spouse at the time, I should say, was clergy there. She was one of the associate priests. And I very jokingly like to say we met across a crowded nave. Our eyes met, and actually the music director of the church introduced us at an evensong for no, I'm sorry, it wasn't an evensong. It was a requiem mass on All Saints, and we sort of hit it off and found each other very interesting and started dating. I believe it was in February of that next year, and both being older, I decided that we should get married. So we were married then in January of the following year. We just celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary. Uh,
Nice.
so it is, I guess I should say, I'm coming to things in a very different way. That my spouse was a priest and had been a priest for many years before I even met her. So I think our relationship is much different than anyone that went through the transition of someone going through seminary, or through the transition of someone who is uh, in the laity to decide then, after they were married, to become a priest, because that's a huge family decision, and not an individual decision. So um, I also
And you're a church professional.
I,
So you're not like in another kind of world. You're in that world.
I have worked in the church for many, many years, and I have the unique position of being the director of music at the church where my spouse serves as the rector, which is very not common in the church, but it just sort of happened there. She had been at the church, taken that position. I guess she'd been there maybe 6 months or so when the director of music decided he wanted to retire after 14, 15 years, with very little notice. And she was just trying to figure out the budget of the church and what resources they had, and all of those things. And someone in the parish actually mentioned, well, isn't your husband a church musician? Could he step in and help us out for a short time? So I've been the interim there for 2.5 years now, I think, or at least 2 years. But I will point out, one where we're very strict on, I'm trying to think how you would even say it, the appearance of things. I am non-stipendiary by choice. I am not paid. Holly is not my direct report. The junior warden is. So there's no lines that are being crossed. Everything is always goes through proper channels and things, and it's turned out to be actually a very lovely situation. So I've enjoyed it, at least. I don't.
Yeah. And for your paid job, your day job, as it were, you plan pilgrimages.
I am the
And,
national director of sales for a company called Faith Journeys, and yes, we are a dedicated pilgrimage company. That's all we do is pilgrimage.
well, so what I'd like is if you would give us your elevator speech on what is the difference between a pilgrimage and a trip. Why would you call it a pilgrimage?
Yes. I never talk badly about any other companies, but there are companies that aren't pilgrimage companies that do offer pilgrimage. And I think the big difference is a pilgrimage is not a sightseeing trip. It is not about staying in luxurious hotels and eating five-star Michelin meals. It's about connecting with God, connecting with your community, connecting with the people in the place that you're when which you're traveling. There's a quote I'll paraphrase from Pope Benedict. I shared this quote with Cathy earlier, but I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to paraphrase it. Um, to go on pilgrimages is to meet God in places where He's revealed Himself in the past. You know, has that revelation been in an action? Has that relation been to a person or to a people, and that's why you're going. You're going for that connection, and so what we strive to do is in building our pilgrimages, we don't really, and I don't want this to be a sales pitch, but we don't give you a set, here's an itinerary, hey, there you go, you're done. We like to consult and build an itinerary and build in time um, for reflection and prayer. When you go in a building like Canterbury Cathedral, it shouldn't be a 10-minute tour and here's this and here's this and that's where Becket was martyred. Okay, let's go to the next place. You need to sit in that space. You need to absorb the spirituality that permeates the entire atmosphere of it. So that's very important. Also, building in corporate worship. That it is a very important part of any pilgrimage that a group of people are going on, that you worship together, whether that be Compline, evening prayer, morning prayer, or celebrating the Eucharist at multiple points along the way. It is of the utmost because you are building that community, and then that experience of that smaller community goes back into their larger community, and those reverberations just keep going
Mhm.
and going because they'll tell the stories of what they experienced, and that moves on.
So if one were new to the idea of pilgrimage and felt moved to go on a pilgrimage, let's not talk about a group pilgrimage. If you were if you had sort of an urge, like because as you and I talked, a pilgrimage is all about the movement of the spirit, right? So if I'm feeling moved to go on some kind of pilgrimage, what kinds of things might I look for to kind of get started? If I didn't want to hire somebody and I was having this conversation in my own head, what kinds of things prompt you to it isn't sightseeing, but there are sights,
There
right?
are.
So how might you advise somebody who was thinking, I need a pilgrimage, but I don't know where to start?
Yeah, I think as you're saying that there is always a mix. I think what's most important for people is to look inside themselves and find what is their what is their motivation, what drives them. In some cases, that might be Celtic Christianity. In some cases, that may be a deeper understanding of Scripture. In some cases, that may be, to walk in the very footsteps of the Apostle Paul. But once they've thought about that, then they can start looking into so many resources that are available from authors to online sources to I have and I will always advise any clergy or clergy spouse that is looking to plan something on their own and they just want advice about, hey, I really have an interest in St. Augustine. Where should I go? Where should I stay? If they just contact me, I will always be happy to do that. But yeah, I think there has to be a personal connection. I mean, if I don't really care about Paul, why would I want to go on a pilgrimage to Greece? Where for me, Anglican spirituality and the Oxford movement and all of that is so important. That is what
Right.
motivates me. That's where I would want to go.
I went on a pilgrimage one time. I was by myself, and the sort of starting point for it was Salisbury, because not because of Salisbury itself, but because of the Susan Howich novels, The Glittering Images. She's an English writer. I see Jane nodding her head. I'm used to be completely addicted to them. I've got several copies which I give away, and so the town in the center of the place is based allegedly on Salisbury, and so it was kind of like going to a movie location, right? It was a sort of a magical thinking sort of thing, and of course I fell in love with Salisbury. But I was there because of the books.
Well,
So
that
whatever
that's
toe hold, you
that's
know.
that's a great motivation. And when you open yourself to the spirit, then other things will be revealed to you when you're in that moment. I mean, you could say going to the grocery store could be a pilgrimage if you're open to what might happen on the way there or while you're there.
Okay, so talk a little bit about that, because one of the things that you and I talked about the other day is many different ways of being a pilgrim. So say some more about that openness and how you the heart attitude.
Yes, it is a difficult thing for me to talk about because I'm very typically stoic until the moment I'm not, and then I'm gushy. So um, I think when we open our hearts to experiences, then we find those experiences. When we have our hearts closed to them, then it's interesting when I read evaluations and I speak to people that have traveled, the reactions that they have in particular places. I think I shared a story with Cathy, and I'll share it. When I was in Jerusalem for the first time, um, I was so looking forward to walking the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. It was like the culmination of everything in that pilgrimage for me was to get to walk through those streets in the souk. And then I got there and I got on the streets. And I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but it is a bazaar. It is a street market, so noisy, crowded, people moving all over, you needing to make sure your hand is on your wallet so no one is taking it out of your pocket. And it's not particularly, to me, spiritual. It was more of just an exercise of, okay, now we've done this. You couldn't pray stations or anything like that. Um, but we went to one of the days following that to Bethlehem and saw the church. Lovely. Marysville, lovely. Went to the Shepherd's Field, which is uh, a field. I mean, it's really a field with caves all over it in the rock, and you can go down and there are these lovely chapels underneath with nativity sets all over. And I went to make a video for my company. I went up the stairs, and it was a cold rainy day, and it was pretty close to sleet, but the rain started hitting me, and I was getting my camera ready to try to block the rain from hitting it, and the sun was just coming through the clouds, and it hit me at that moment that's where angels were. That's where the angels were. But I wouldn't have experienced that if I hadn't have been open to that moment and God speaking to me right then and there.
Right.
So it's not about the expectation, it's about the anticipation of what will be revealed.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I'm interested in the idea of, especially when you go to a place like the Holy Land or, um, you know, any place that's deeply, deeply historical. I'm interested in the difference between this really happened here for sure, this for damn sure happened right here, which is pretty fuzzy thinking, especially in the Holy Land. And yet it doesn't, and the idea of tradition tells the story that this happens here. Can you talk about whether or not, about the role of historicity, I guess, maybe is what I'm asking.
Yes, and it is a problem. And to preface it, I'm going to talk about Edinburgh for a while. I actually lived in Edinburgh for several years, and on Princess Street there is the John Knox Museum. Everyone knows who John Knox was, famous preacher, uh, and people go to this museum and they're just so blown away. Oh, this is John Knox's house where it's located. Well, here's the problem. I lived in Edinburgh, and I can tell you for a fact, no one knows if John Knox lived in that house. They know he lived somewhere on that block, but they don't know he lived in that house. So it's just been the John Knox Museum for so long. Everyone makes the assumption that that was his house. They don't say it was, but they make that assumption. The same thing, to an extent, happens in more historic places, especially biblical sites. Um, Cathy and I had a lovely conversation the other day about there are two sites in Jerusalem that are really well known, and you've probably heard of both of them. One is Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the traditional site of the crucifixion and resurrection. It is a fabulously beautiful formal site. There are always prayers going on and incense being burned and candles being lit, and it is unbelievably crowded, but
And super ornate, like very
super
like
ornate.
pieced together. It's unnerving.
It's one of those places that you do feel awe when you walk into just seeing the site itself, and the scale and beauty of it. Then there's another site a few miles away that was found much later. It was actually the Holy Sepulchre was established at the time of Helena, the mother of Constantine. So they think that was the site since that date. Now we're talking about a place called the Garden Tomb. The Garden Tomb was discovered in the 1800s by an archaeologist who found this site that had a cave tomb that had been carved out of rock that had a face of a rock that looked like a skull. I mean, it fit all of the description. So they did develop a site around it. It is in a garden. It is quiet. It is contemplative. It is a place you can just go and sit and pray in quietness and in communion with God. Which one's the site? The thing is, it doesn't really matter because they both have the same message that the tomb is empty. The tomb is empty in both sites. But if you're like me, and I'll use Cathy as the example here, if you're like me, I love the formal. I'm very, very Anglo-Catholic, and I mean, I love big cathedrals and high choir music and all of those things. So that place is much more moving to me. But I'm not everyone. Cathy told me when we had this conversation, she'd been to the Garden Tomb and she was very moved by the Garden Tomb. I found it fascinating and beautiful, but I didn't have the same feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really matter. And we have that happen with sites all throughout the
Mm-hmm.
Middle East, through Greece, in Italy. We really don't know. St. Paul's outside the walls in Rome has been uh, believed to have the tomb of St. Paul for centuries. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they just did an archaeological study about 2 years ago and did a tunnel, dug a tunnel all the way down, took some equipment in and took a sample, and they proved that the bones that are buried in this very ornate box underneath the high altar date from the first century. So could it very well could be. There's no way we can prove it. The only thing we have to do is believe it. And if we believe it, it's true.
Right. There was a there's a saying that all stories are true and some actually happened.
That's very
Right.
good.
But all stories are true. And I think it speaks to your assertion that the openness is where it's at. Because if you're open to it, God comes in through the openness. And if your intellect, and as of course as Episcopalians, we're all prone to intellectualizing things. I don't know about, I mean, I know about you, but I don't know about the rest of the friends here. But if you can overcome the idea of, this is probably not where something happened, but open yourself up to what it means, um, that's very precious.
The Jordan River is another great example. There are two sites that could be the site of the baptism by John of Jesus. But if you're going to get in the water and be baptized, what difference does it make? You're in the Jordan River. I mean, does it really matter if you're standing on that exact site or if you're
Right.
in the same water?
Right. So Laura Beckham writes in here, how do you foster that openness? Is that good, Laura? Um, what would you say, Darren, if you were going to head out and you wanted it to be a pilgrimage? How would you prime the pump, either specifically for a pilgrimage or just in life, how do you foster an openness to that surprise from the Spirit?
Okay, now you're getting much deeper than I know if I can answer or not. I
Well,
it's so individual. I think preparation is a great thing. I think in the groups that we work with, very often I'm asked, do you have any resources that my group could, read or study uh, before we go? And I think those moments of preparation really do help you. And again, going back to Israel, you know, we grow up hearing scripture and we know the names of these sites and we know what happened at these sites. But when you're standing in the place and seeing that site, it's like the words of the Bible go from black and white to full color. All of a sudden, and you'll
mhm,
anyone that has experienced this will know what I'm saying. When you come back and the lectionary for that day happens to have a reading that's about one of the sites you visited, you're there. Your mind will take you right
mhm,
to that spot.
mhm.
But I think you have to have that willingness of being prepared, being open. And I'm not sure how to tell people how to be open to those things other than just going. You have to go.
I think that to broaden it completely out, in a world, in the world in which we live, there are so many signs that things are not okay. And yet we pray, one of the collects in baptism is that we be open to the joy and wonder in all God's works. And so I think that one way, whether you're planning a pilgrimage and preparing for that, or just trying to get through your day without losing your shit, pardon my French, is I think it's a really Celtic idea to sort of boil down the little things. Say a prayer when you're washing your hands. Um, my friend Mary Vano has a prayer she says when she puts on her seatbelt. Um, and I think that those little things, the sort of, there are Celtic prayers for sweeping the hearth. I think that those kinds of things uh, keep our ground tilled up so that the openness maybe can be permeated, penetrated.
I I
But
guess
sometimes it's a surprise. I'm sorry, let me just say though that sometimes if we can be as open as possible, then we get surprised by the Spirit. And that's really lovely.
I,
Sorry.
and that was actually the point I was going to as a church musician. Sometimes the planning of what's supposed to happen and the execution of what's supposed to happen don't always match up, and we have to punt. Uh, but I have found when we're open and tuned in uh, to the worship itself, to the spirit, that it always happens, and it always happens like it
Mhm.
should have happened. It has nothing to do with my planning or preparation. It just happens because it was supposed to.
Um, Preparing music is a great example because it's very technical, right? And you got to rehearse. And I assume you're an organist. Do you have a choir that you? So there's so many things. That's a great metaphor. How do you, whether you're planning a pilgrimage or planning for the Holy Week, um, I think one of the struggles we have as professional church people is to keep that wonder, the joy and wonder, because the church doesn't always help us out with that. The people aren't always nice, for example. Do you have a way to keep your wonder, or do you
Uh,
struggle with that?
I do struggle with it a bit, and I will admit there's a lot about leading pilgrimage that relates to being a church musician in that it is rare that I feel I can be engaged in the actual worship instead of driving the bus to make sure everyone is experiencing the worship. The same thing with leading a pilgrimage, whether it's you or a group that you're traveling with. Where is the line between you getting to fully experience what's going on and you driving that bus of making sure everyone's where they need to be, making sure all the things are happening that are supposed to. And I think one of the things I try to do in both and in tandem with Holly is in the service side of things, build in time, build in quiet. You don't need to go from on the music side from as soon as the word amen hits that the music starts. There can be spaces, there can be time to recenter and to be part of what's going on before you need to move. Same way with pilgrimage. If you plan it by yourself and you're going, or you're taking a group, you must plan in time for connecting with the surroundings in prayer, in quietness, journaling,
Mhm.
reflection. There are so many things. And in fact, we do social justice pilgrimage. And one of the huge things that I build into all of those is time for conversation. Because where I grew up and my age and my skin color and my gender all have determined how I think of things. That's not how everyone else does. And when we go
Mhm.
to a site that's very moving and we don't share what we felt in that site, we will never grow because all we're experiencing is ourself. We're not experiencing other
Mhm.
people's. And I've learned so much from that and heard so much from groups that have traveled and appreciated that time to just talk about how did this make me feel?
Mhm. And to hear from other people how it made them feel, right?
Yes.
So you mentioned somewhere along the line that you have thoughts about uh, creating pilgrimage. I think I'm putting words in your mouth, but creating pilgrimage at home, digital resources, books, um, not just resources on what a pilgrimage is, but actual the experience of pilgrimage. Lent is coming up. You know, that's a perfect time to pick up something that might function as a pilgrimage. Um, the labyrinth comes to mind,
Yes.
which was originally, for people who couldn't make it, couldn't walk to the Holy Land, right? So, what do you have to say about that?
If if COVID didn't teach us anything else, it taught us that we can go anywhere we want at any time we want without leaving our house. And there are so many great resources. I usually do, not being clergy myself, but I usually do a Lenten series about particular places. So this year's, since we're hoping that things are calming down in Israel. I'm focusing on sites where Jesus preached, ministered, uh, as a weekly series going through Lent. But if you wanted to tour Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, you can do that online now. If you want to visit the Treasury in Petra, you can do that online now. If you want to connect with others and talk about particular experiences, or one of the great programs that I learned about through my spouse Holly, Walking to Jerusalem. Do any of you know Walking to Jerusalem?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
a program you do with a group or with your entire parish where people not just walk and or run, but they could ride their bicycle, they could swim, they could write cards to people in the parish. They could do anything they want, but they record this time, and then that calculates into particular mileage. And the group will virtually walk
Mhm.
from, in our case, Scottsdale, Arizona, to Jerusalem. And they'll do it as a group and they'll communicate as a group. And they are walking that journey together. They are working towards a goal, and that goal is to better themselves,
Mhm.
to better others. And in return to
Hmm.
travel to Jerusalem.
Well, it strikes me that this is kind of a pilgrimage experience. Got Marianne is in Honolulu, or at least Hawaii. I'm on the East Coast in Boston, and we're all everywhere in between, really, literally. And that's a lovely shared experience. That's lovely.
Well, in meeting you at General Convention, I will admit I am enjoying this shared walk that we are all in as clergy spouses, and the fact that there are now resources that I didn't know were available uh,
Hmm.
for me to reach out to, and that is a pilgrimage. Everything we do is a pilgrimage, our entire life, and we choose the little journeys within it. But
Hmm.
we're all going to the final destination together.
Yeah, yeah. I want um, if you've had any thoughts or anything that's come up that's uh, struck you as interesting, or you have a question, please do utilize the chat for that. Laura says it's a struggle to keep the wonder while leading a group, compounded by the role of clergy spouse, which can mean leading the clergy too, which is, I mean, it's the care and feeding of the clergy, as well. I have recently learned that you can see the Book of Kells online. They've got it completely digitized. So it strikes me that that would be a lovely Lenten thing to take a page a week or a page a day and you know sit with something that's that beautiful
Um,
Which is
available.
because the Book of Kells exhibition is going under renovation right now, so you can't actually visit it
Hmm.
until I believe it's reopening in maybe June or July of this year.
Hmm.
So that's a great way. And if you did go to visit it, you'd only see one page, unless you went back later and then you could see another page. But you can't see
That's
the whole thing.
interesting.
You only see one page at a time.
um, Dana had a question for you, Darren, and that is, as a musician, have you ever created a pilgrimage that follows music in the church, from the Holy Land to Taizé to cathedrals?
I have put together several pilgrimages for churches that had an interest in Anglican music, where they go to places like Canterbury Cathedral, St. Paul's, Westminster Abbey, York and Durham, and King's College, Cambridge, to hear the choirs sing services, either evensong or to hear sung Eucharist. I've also sent groups to Taizé. It is a fabulous place to go. It's really difficult to take a group there because they are in charge of all the housing. So if you're not sure you want to sleep on a sleeping bag or a cot or top of a table, then you probably don't want to stay there. But you can go there during the day. Um, but I tie in music with a lot of the pilgrimages I plan. I think it's very important for groups to sing together because Saint Augustine tells us to sing is to pray twice. So to me, that's very.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't know how many of you have seen the new Bob Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown. You've seen it? Raise your hand, wave your hand, Marianne. It's an old hippie. Pan, I bet you've seen it. Yeah. It's it's astonishing. And I am the first to say that I am not a Bob Dylan fan. I have for he's I'm not a fan of listening to him sing his own stuff, but we owe him a lot. And my best Dylan stuff has been filtered through Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Joan Baez, and those people with whom I grew up. Um, but the movie is a pilgrimage. It's really a pilgrimage of music. It avoids the cliche of somebody's a nobody and then he becomes a star and then he's a drug addict and then he crashes and burns. There's none of that. It's just all about the music. And furthermore, they make the case that he's the successor to the earlier folk music pilgrims. And and so it makes me think that one could create a pilgrimage for music, for driving in the car, or I'm going to listen with my headphones, every evening for the next period of time. Music is a wonderful aspect.
Definitely.
Have you led a group to Oberammergau? It's on the bucket list. Have you done that?
Well, yes. Uh, I have only worked in pilgrimage now for 8 years. Before that, I worked on the music side of things, sending choirs and bands and orchestras and all over the world. So in 2020, we were planning a ton of groups traveling to Oberammergau. We were so excited, and I was going to go. We were taking a group from the church. It was going to be fabulous, and then we all know what happened, COVID. They did move it back to 2022, and I did have two groups that went. I was not able to go. So we're hoping. The question is now: is it going to be back on the decade years and land on 2030, or if they're going to make it 10 years from the last one, which is 2032? And as soon as we find that information out, we will be back on it, because I think Oberammergau is fascinating. You don't need to speak German to know what's going on. It is a powerful story.
I'd be interested if you all would, if you've been on a pilgrimage, where did you go? Tell us, or uh, maybe you could just do it with your words. I know Dana Sparks can't talk, but if there's anybody else who has a pilgrimage that they went on, I'd be interested to know where you've been.
How to raise my hand.
Jump right in.
We've done two to the UK. One, actually, the southern part, Canterbury, Salisbury, Winchester, up to Oxford, and then Melrose Abbey, Fountains, Fountains Abbey, and then a second one that we kind of did more north, including Iona, which was a highlight, and then across Scotland, and ending in Edinburgh. But we have one coming up to the footsteps of St. Paul. So that's what I'm particularly interested in learning more about right now. And we had wanted to go to the Holy Land, but decided that that was not right at this moment. So we're kind of doing the next best thing, we thought. So any resources you have that I could share with our group in preparation would be wonderful for that particular troop.
Yeah, I'm going to put my email in the chat.
Wonderful, thank you.
An email, and I'm happy to see what I can find for you.
While somebody else is thinking, I want to tell the story that I told Darren about my first trip to the Holy Land, and the fact that Jerusalem has always been such a metaphor to me. Jerusalem, my happy home. When shall I come to thee? It's in our hymns. It's in our Holy Week lessons and stuff. But it's just been an idea. And the first time that I saw Jerusalem, the bus guy took us up the back of the Mount of Olives so that it would have the maximum impact. We would see it all at once. And I burst into tears, and my knees went out from under me, and I kissed the ground. I couldn't, and it was absolutely involuntary. The shock of realization that this place is not just a metaphor, and that's an experience that you always want to do it again. It's like bungee jumping or something. There's such an adrenaline to that surprise. Anyone else been on a pilgrimage that you want to tell us about?
There is a lot in the chat.
Is there?
The unexpected thing for us was that we had 9 Episcopal clergy on a trip to Israel that ended the Saturday before the bombing on Friday. And I'm a new clergy wife, and I don't know my Bible, and I knew that going in, but this was my husband's dream to go. And the thing that was so unexpected to me is that we have several friends who sing beautifully a cappella. And we had 4-part harmony in the cave singing about the away in a manger. And we had 4-part harmony there was a church in particular, and I don't remember because I wasn't set ahead of time to know where we were going. I don't remember all the places, but there was one church where we had to wait while another group finished singing so we could go in and sing. And
Amen.
it was just wonderful. So, yeah, the whole thing, Cathy, what you said about when you do the reading in church and then you can see the place. And it was very, very special.
Amy Spicer, can you tell us about your pilgrimage to Selma and Montgomery? Was there a surprise from that? Anything that particularly got you in the gut on that trip?
The biggest surprise is when we were actually in Selma. We stopped for lunch, and next door was a tour group, and they came, well, not a tour group, but a group that gave tours in the area. And they came over after we visited their gift shop and dropped a healthy amount of time in there, and told their firsthand experience, you know, how they were 8 and I think 14 at the time, and walked the bridge, and that was very unexpected. You know, you didn't that first person narrative, not just being in that place, but finding their emotions and really honing in on that.
Thank you. You are no doubt all familiar with the idea of the thin place, right? It's the sort of a Celtic spirituality idea that there are places, and I think I would submit that there are experiences where the veil between us and the next world seem particularly thin. And it goes back to Laura Beckham's question about how do you be open to that? And I'm particularly working very hard to think of the world as a thin place and not as, you know, something to protect myself from. Yeah.
I'm reading Lanny's Lanny's statement in it. It's reminding me of when I'll just share quickly. When I was first moved to the United Kingdom, I was a lay clerk at Newcastle Cathedral, which is one of the men of the choir, and I started getting asked to deputy at York Minster. So I would go over sometimes if they were short a voice, and I would sing with their choir. And the very first Sunday, or the very first service I went over was for an evensong. And I arrived and we had a very quick rehearsal. You don't really sing through anything because they expect you to be able to do it already. But you just check a few things. And then we got dressed in our cassocks and surplice and got ready to process and marched into the aisles and standing there. And the presenter started the service with singing the line, "O Lord, open thou our lips," and the choir answers back in the praises and responses. And it hit me in that moment that we were singing a Tudor setting, so a setting that had been written in the mid-1500s by a composer that I knew who had started his career at York and then went to the Chapel Royal. And I realized that I was singing the same music, the same words, dressed the same way, standing in the same place that someone was doing 500 years ago and had done so every night since then.
Right.
And it was overwhelming. I could not sing. It took me probably a good minute before I was able to compose myself to sing again. But yes, it's being in those buildings and feeling the surrounding of like that statement, what the Stones have to say. It is unbelievably moving. You won't, unexpected and mysterious, but very moving.
So it's about slowing down, whether you're planning an itinerary in the Holy Land or you're just going to the grocery store, right? It's about slowing down and being intentional. One of the things I love about yoga is the idea of setting your intention before, as you're sitting there. This is what I seek, right? Being aware of what you seek and then letting the universe know that this is what you're seeking. Um,
And I think there's also, it's so easy to fill all the space with sound. And I think that there is an element of how we make space is by making space, right? And not filling it with, and by sound, I'm just gonna say music doesn't count as sound, even though it is a sound, right? Like, but when we give space through in our day, whether it's through silence or whether it's through particular intentional listening to particular pieces, that then we allow space for the holy to be present.
You have to find your place. You know, you might think it's strange because my spouse did when we were first married. When I'm in the car driving somewhere, I don't turn on the radio. I don't listen to music at all. I'm a musician. I listen to music all the time. I need that time of just silence with myself and with God, and not thinking about anything else, because the moment I turn on music, my brain is going to go to, oh, that's a G minor 7 chord, and this is why they're doing that, and that's what that cadence point is, and that's not peaceful to me. I have to find
No.
peace, and my peace means no music.
Well, isn't there a thing you probably know that there's something about you can't listen to music without the silence in between? Like the silence is what gives the music meaning, right? The
There's a
rest.
there's a quote by Bach, actually, in German. It's um, Pausen sind Musik auch, which means the rest are music too. They are as much music as any of the notes, and sometimes more important.
That's nice. Nice.
Cathy, we're coming to the end of the time. Is this a good time for me to talk about the new and exciting thing on this topic?
Let's yes.
Okay. I just want to do it before we close. So
Yeah. Let me
just
let me say a
yeah.
couple of things, because you're not going to forget, and I might forget this other stuff, and so I trust you more than I trust me. So we do have about 6 more minutes. So if something comes to mind for the conversation with Darren, please let us know. I want to say that next month we will be talking to Suzanne Edwards Acton, whom we've met before, and she lives in LA. Lost her church. She goes to Altadena church in Altadena, and she's going to talk to us about the Anglican Rosary, about praying the Anglican Rosary. It's an idea that fits right in with our pilgrimage, and we'll be entering Lent. We're going to send some stuff, and Jane, you and I need to figure out how to do this. I want to send some instructions ahead of time, like how to make one if you want to make one for yourself, and then she's going to talk about the journey of the Anglican Rosary. And then in April, our last conversation for the year will be with Brother Curtis Almquist from the Society of St. John the Evangelist, and he is going to talk about whatever he wants. We are not going to guide him. We're just going to let it flow, because if you've never heard Brother Curtis, you must. He's nobody better. And he's rearranged his schedule so that he could be with us in April. So Jane, go ahead, and if you would please tell us what you've got going.
So perfect for this topic. We are right now in the beginning stages of planning a Partners Path pilgrimage in September of 2026. We're going to walk the Camino. Ardell, who was the founder of the Partners Path, has led a couple groups in doing this, and she inspired a few of us to make it happen. So if that's something that you are at all interested in, I'm going to put my email address in the chat, but really you can email anybody at the Partners Path and they'll make sure you know. But we're just kind of in the seeing how many people might be interested stage, and there will be a flyer about that in the near future. But I just want to let people know. And I think the hope is then to also have a a small group experience for pilgrimage spirituality, probably starting in September. So it would run the year beforehand, just kind of, not that you would have to be in it if you go on the walk, or you could go on the walk and not be in it. But just for people who would be interested in that. So that's up and coming.
Thank you. Darren, do you, it happens really fast. Was there anything else, any of your favorite ideas about pilgrimage? You've put your email in the chat.
Yeah, apparently I can't type when my computer is higher than my wrists, so that's why
Okay.
I'm typoing it. But one of the best angle,
Right, right. So if anybody has there's been talk at their church of planning some sort of a group, I'm sure you'd be glad to talk to people about that.
I am happy to just simply consult and talk through ideas of what is possible, what is not possible, and then let you run with that, whichever direction you want to run with that. I think, as in being a musician, God has given me particular gifts, and it is my responsibility and duty to share those gifts with others. I have a certain body of knowledge and experience when it comes to pilgrimage that I'm always happy to share with others. If they want to travel with us, great. If they're just planning something on their own, great. It doesn't really matter. It's more about us supporting each other. That's what Christians do. So
It's the diversity of gifts. Mhm. I think that all of you, and I can tell from your names that all of you are in our super secret Cone of Silence Facebook group, which I started about 12 years ago. If you are not, if you're on Facebook, which is a whole nother conversation to be had, I'll put my email in and let me know if you are not in that group. It is, we're pretty careful to try to keep it positive, and that's hard sometimes. But it is also a nice little supportive group. And as Jane mentioned, the Partners Path is the sponsor of this event, and there's so much that the Partners Path is doing and trying to do and do better that doesn't cost anything to do, but it's not free to do. And I hope that if you have not yet become a financial supporter of the Partners Path, that you will. $20 a month at the website, you can do stuff like that. It would be a really great blessing. So that would be a wonderful thing.
one
One
closing
more.
comment, a really easy comment. If anyone is going to EPN in Kansas City in a few weeks, please stop by and see me. I'll be there with a booth, and I'd love to talk to you in person.
Episcopal Parish Network, formerly known as Consortium of Endowed Episcopal Parishes. Yeah. All right, my friends. Thank you so much. What a blessing to see your faces and to have meaningful conversation. Darren, I appreciate it so much.
My pleasure. I'm happy to do it. Happy to be with all of you for this hour.
Go in peace, my friends, to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.